and put the name of the class and we'll pass it on. Okay, let's finish up Jabotinsky here. And then we'll talk about a few general things. There's a lot more people we could read, but I think that you can read some of these folks on your own. Let's see. So let's just finish this testimony. We got to the end of it. I just wanted you to know how he finished it up so you can understand where he was coming to. But I think it's a very, I'm glad he included this passage because it really is very well constructed and leads to that conclusion where he threatens them. So he doesn't break down crying, he threatens them with revolt, basically. And if they hadn't gotten him out of Palestine, it probably would have happened, actually. And that's what Wingate wanted to do, actually, in 1936. He went to the Zionist leadership and he proposed leading a revolt himself in Palestine against the British administration because he thought it was so unjust. And they were just astonished that a British officer would come to them and propose such a thing. He wanted to raid the Haifa oil refinery and take it over and so on, because he'd already trained Jewish fighting units to protect the pipelines and everything. He had trained future leaders of Israel, people like Moshe Dayan and others who later became well known. So Jabotinsky on page 566 and 567 is talking about, he wants an investigation. He says someone is guilty. And he wants legalization of Jewish self-defense, and he wants to open up both sides of this Jordan River for settlement of both Jews and Arabs. Not just give the area across the Jordan to King Abdullah from Mecca, who has no business being here in the first place, and for services rendered to British Crown in 1917. You just don't give a family a piece of territory when a whole people is about to perish, and you've been instructed and you've taken on a mandate to try to build a homeland for these people. And then you give it all away to someone for political reasons. I mean, this is what nobody ever recognizes. I mean, sure, James Baker knows nothing about this. You know, these people come along and make their commissions and their studies, and basically they're doing what Baker did in the first Iraq War. He did the same thing which the British are doing to Jabotinsky. He, for the first time, would not let the Israelis respond to the Scud missile attacks from Iraq. He forbade them to respond in kind. The Israelis have never done that, not responded to a military attack. We made basically ghetto Jews out of them. We'll protect you. The Americans will protect you. And we see how the Americans protected them. And, you know, and so on. So he didn't want them to, and they didn't respond to the Scud missile attacks. That was an incredible moment in their history. And we look back on, I'm talking about, you people don't probably remember that, and it was only about 15 years ago. But that was a real turning point in the history of Israel. And now this guy's back again, this Baker. He hasn't done enough damage to everybody. He's going to tell us how to solve the Iraq question. Who asked him? Who invited him? He doesn't know anything about the Middle East. And none of the people on his committee know anything about the Middle East. Not one Middle Eastern historian. What is the Supreme Court Justice? What's her name? Day O'Connor. What does she know? What is the fellow who used to be the governor of Virginia, who was a Marine guard in the White House and married Lyndon Johnson's daughter, and then was thrown out of his governorship in Virginia because he was having affairs with people? What's his name, that fellow? He's on the committee too, huh?
Patrick something.
No, not Patrick. What's his name?
Well, I thought you were talking about Kennedy, no?
Oh, no, the guy on the committee, he digs these non-entities up out of nowhere and sticks them on this committee. And they're supposed to tell everyone how we're going to solve the Middle East problem. What's this guy's name? It's on the tip of my tongue. He married Johnson's daughter, Linda Bird Johnson. And then he was a Marine Guard in the White House. Then he got through that, the Johnson family connections. He got to be a political figure and governor of Virginia. And then he got thrown out because he was caught in motels with his trousers somewhere where they shouldn't be. And so on. Chuck Robb, his name is, Charles Robb. You guys don't even know him. And he's on the committee. He's going to tell us how to solve the Middle East question. It's a total joke, you see. But as long as it says committee to solve the Iraq question, the committee has told us how to do this. Yeah. Fortunately, Junior Bush is a very stubborn person. So stubborn beyond no one could have imagined how stubborn he is. So he doesn't usually listen to committees. So this is one committee I think he'll do well to ignore. But who knows what he's got. You can never know with Junior Bush what he's got up in store next. It's always you never know what's coming. So. And also he says, on the Jewish side, reforms are necessary. Bottom of 567. And the Jewish agency, I told you about the Jewish agency, should be reformed. It doesn't represent the whole or even majority of Zionist Jews. We're not involved in it. It's only labor Zionists. This should be rebuilt. I can agree to him. I knew what the Jewish agency was when I was in Israel in different times from about the 1960s to the 1990s. I spent time now and then in Israel. And the Jewish agency was always a joke. And I have to be honest, family members of mine worked for the Jewish agency. I met them there, and I don't think that they really knew what was going on in the world at all. But anyway, leave that aside. He wants to reform even the Jewish side too. And we think time has come, with the consent of the mandatory, that it should be universal suffrage, which have proper elections to this body. We think reform is quite timely. One of them we will be brought to the knowledge of this commission in the report of the Betar. Are you going to tell us what is misleading? What is the main point? There's been misleading information. Yes, if you would allow me about 10 minutes. I'm asking that we are trying to involve, we're trying to involve this empire for medical complications and obstacles. I deny it. I am the only one that should Great Britain go this way and really help us, to the best of my belief I affirm, and I'm not the only one, that should Great Britain go this way and really help us to save the Jewish people as it was meant and promised in the Balfour Declaration, the course of this great experiment will be as normal as the course of any other great enterprise in social evolution. We utterly deny that it means bringing Great Britain to conflict with the world of Islam. We utterly deny that it means a real physical conflict with the neighboring states. We deny all this. It's been exaggerated beyond all recognition. It's not true. Given a firm resolve, made clearly known to both Jews and Arabs, all this would be performed with the normal smoothness of any other equally big colonization enterprise. Anyway. As to keeping the country quiet and avoiding disturbances, I've already submitted, try what has never been tried by, try reestablishing the Jewish regiment or battalion, it should be called, as part and parcel of the permanent garrison, legitimatize Jewish self-defense and so on. So, of course, none of that. They're not going to do any of this. And he's just whistling in the wind here, but it's nice that he puts it out. You have heard of compromises, halfway houses which are being suggested, including cantonization or parity or cultural rapprochement or the Jews giving in. These are the things that were being tossed about then. Believe my sincerity, and it is the sincerity of the whole movement, the sincerity of every Jew I am now trying to avoid. We wish a halfway house could be possible, but it's perfectly impossible. We cannot accept cantonization like in Switzerland and so on. Even, some would say even the whole of Palestine may prove too small for the humanitarian purposes we need. A corner, a canton, that's impossible. We can't accept that. If we said we could, we would be lying. How can we give in? What can be the concession of Oliver Twist? We do not believe any compromise on these lines. Cantonization is a dream. It will never be enforced. will never or believed by anybody, and trying it again and again means prolonging the state of things, which in my submission has led to the riots of 1920, 1921, 1929, and 1936, and will lead again to more riots in effect. The only way is to tell the Arabs the truth, and then you will see the Arab becomes reasonable, the Arab is clever, the Arab is just, the Arabs can realize that since there are 3 or 4 or 5 holy Arab states, then it's a thing of justice which Great Britain is doing if Palestine is transformed into a Jewish state. Well, you might have thought that was true, but as we've discovered, that is not true. It's my unpleasant duty to wind up by taking into consideration a melancholy, pessimistic contingency. What will happen if what the Jews desire cannot be conceded by Great Britain? I wish I could omit mentioning that contingency for many personal reasons. Jewish national reasons, but to omit it is impossible. We are asked very often, whatever is meant by the Balfour Declaration was promised in 1917. But since then, perhaps the British people have honestly come to the conclusion that they cannot do it. I deny it. I affirm they can. But when I'm asked, when any Jew is asked, what are the Jews going to pin us down to the promise and say, you promised Shiloh, promised the pound of flesh, passed the pound of flesh? Gentlemen, here I answer you, in the name of the most extreme, I am the most extreme Zionist party, I admit it, no. If Great Britain is really unable to do it, not unwilling, I'd change it, but unable, we bow to that decision, but then we should expect her to give back the mandatory. Anyone who feels he cannot carry out the mandate should give it back, and so on and so forth. Okay, we read all that. And some of you had a question. Now, first of all, there was someone who was asking about Menachem Begin. Was it you? What were you asking about Menachem Begin?
You said something like Jabotinsky didn't really have any good predecessors. I think, well...
successors.
Successors, yeah.
Successors. Well, Begin, I mentioned Menachem Begin.
It's too dirty, you know.
Now, we mentioned Menachem Begin, and he's someone that people have heard of. I don't think we have any selections here from Menachem Begin. There was an organization founded. It was called the Irgun Zwei Leumi. Short, the Irgun. This is something that was known by the time of after the Second World War, and there was another group as well called Lehi. And what did that stand for? I'm not. Oh, I know. Lochamei Israel. Lochamei means fighters of Israel. These were the 2 underground organizations that the British were trying to suppress in Palestine after this commission. That this ultimately became known as the Stern Gang by the British. Maybe some of you have heard of the Stern Gang. Anyway, that was Lehi, Lochamei Israel. And this was Irgun Zwei Israel Leumi, the organization of the Army of the People. The organization of the Army of the People. So they did start these underground organizations to try to combat the mandate and bring in illegal immigration. Now, Begin was someone who came from Russia at the time of the World War II period. He was known in Russian Zionist circles, perhaps, but he was unknown in Palestine by the British. So when he came to Palestine, he was smuggled into Palestine through Syria and I think Turkey or whatever. He assumed a leadership role as an underground person because the British had no record on him, no dossier, no fingerprints, nothing about him. He was unknown to them. And that's how he rose to prominence. But he was not someone that people knew much about. And as time went on, when finally Begin did come to power, the Irgun became the party that it became the right-wing party. The kibbutz movements, the moshav movements became the left-wing party, the Labor Party. If you want to read more about labor Zionism, as I told you in the Zionist idea book, I really don't have time to cover labor Zionism. You can read about it in your History of Zionism book if you want. It's not really something that can be, dealt with in the course of too much thinking. You have a Ben-Gurion article in 604. Is there anything in the Ben-Gurion 604 that would be of interest to us? He's really the representative of what was called the Histadrut, and it's all in here. Histadrut is the labor union organization, so he rose up to the labor union organizations. He's not a very sophisticated thinker ideologically, you can read the piece in here by Ben-Gurion if you want, but I don't think it adds a lot to it. And the other thinker in here is Gordon, A.D. Gordon. He was the sort of ideologue of the labor movement in the 20s and 30s. Let's see what we have here, Gordon. This piece is from 1911, it looks like, so we've got a lot of pieces. 1856 to 1922. So there's a lot about, and he is the one who thinks they have to return to the land, work the land, things like that. So there are some labor Zionists, and they become, in this book as well, they become the party that runs the government of the Palestinian Jews, the Jewish agency, which Jabotinsky is complaining about. And they are the government of Israel when the state is founded under Ben-Gurion. What's your point?
What's that?
You had your hand up.
Oh, well, I was just thinking about the Haganah versus the Irgun.
Okay, the Haganah is the labor union self-defense. That's the Labor Party. That's the kibbutz.
So they kind of sold out to the British, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, I don't think anyone sold out, but they just have a different philosophy. That's the one people have heard out, and this means defense. Now today, the Israeli Defense Army is called Zahal. Sva, again from here. Haganah, from here. L'Israel. And I guess it's from here. So I guess in a way they were representing all three groups, if you want. This was the most extreme. This was a terrorist organization. Terror has a bad name now, but they were really fighting against British troops and trying to convince, like in Iraq today, the British to leave Palestine. Just that people are trying to convince us to leave Iraq. Now, I mean, I think they should leave the Sunni areas, frankly. Let Sunnis do what they want. They don't have any oil there anyway, so let them do what they want. Just don't let them incur to the Shiite or the Kurd areas, and the whole Iraq thing is solved. You don't have to worry about it. It's a very simple solution, but it's so simple that nobody can do it. Instead, I don't want to get into Iraq, but I'm saying they just want the the British to leave. So Haganah was the kibbutz defense organizations. So people like Sharon, Ariel Sharon, who was one of the younger people, he was Ben-Gurion's favorite. Ben-Gurion loved Sharon. He was involved in, secret operations in the 50s and 60s. In the Suez campaign, he was head of a paratroop regiment that parachuted into the Mitla Pass and blocked the Egyptians from reinforcing people in Sinai. In the Six-Day War, he was the head of one of the columns in Sinai, the tank column that cut through the middle of Sinai in '73. He was the person that crossed the Suez Canal with his units that the Israeli government thought couldn't do it, and basically chopped off the back of the Egyptian army and trapped them. And then Kissinger had to come and convince the Israelis to release them, but basically won the Yom Kippur War for the Israelis. And that's why he became popular. But he was actually a left-wing Labor Party person. But he swung over to the right wing, and he made an alliance with Menachem Begin. He was much younger, and all these people admired military young men because they were so unmilitary. Ben-Gurion was a labor union person. Begin was someone who supposedly was an intellectual. But you see, when the chips were down and the peace process began with Carter, Begin was willing to go back on all his principles as far as what happened when Sadat came to Jerusalem. He won the Nobel Peace Prize with Sadat, and I don't know if Carter was included, and I don't think so. But, you know, people felt Begin had renounced, just like Sharon, all of what he supposedly represented. So I don't think he was a pure Jabotinsky person. Begin. He made out like he was that kind of person, but I don't think he had the intellectual grounding of Jabotinsky.
The same thing kind of happened to Moshe Dayan as well.
Similar. All these people get, in the end, their head becomes easily, I wouldn't say turned. They don't live up to their principles in terms of what they've announced themselves as. Put it that way.
What? Moshe Dayan's daughter, I think, is one of the founders. Or
she's extreme left-wing person.
Yeah,
extreme left-wing person. She wrote an interesting book. Moshe Dayan had a daughter who was very, what do you say when someone's young and very gifted? It was very
theological.
I forget the word that you used, but when they're before their times or ahead of their times is a word. I can't think of it now.
Prodigy?
Like a prodigy, but more like someone who was precocious. It's very, very precocious. You know, she was having affairs when she was 18, which was really rather odd and new for Israel, for young girls to be having affairs and all this. She went to Paris, lived in Paris. She was reading a French novel. She wrote a book called New Face in the Mirror, a novel. She wrote several novels. And then she was on Ariel Sharon's command staff in the 1967 war in Sinai. She wrote a book about that. I don't know what else she was. She married one of Ariel Sharon's officers on his staff. I guess they were having an affair and all the war was going on. I don't know what they were doing. But anyway, she's a big feminist in Israel today. You know, she's very left-wing. There's nothing wrong with that, that's fine. But the point is, none of these people are what their fathers or whatever advertise themselves as, put it that way. Except Netanyahu and a few people like him. They don't change. They are what they are, announce themselves as, and they stay that way. There's a person from Russia who's like this, Sharansky, who Bush likes a lot because Sharansky says that, I guess he put it in, Bush liked this, he interviewed or went to the White House. Sharansky led the Refusnik movement in Russia. They went to Siberia, so on, was put into the work camps by the Russians, and finally was, hunger strikes and managed to help get a lot of Jews out of Russia and went to Israel and then became in the right-wing party. People were surprised. They thought he would be in the left-wing party. But he said his main idea, what he told Bush, is democracies don't do terrorism. I think it was something like that. And I guess that's here where Bush got the idea that you should get democracy in the Middle East. There wouldn't be terrorism there. We don't have democracy in the Middle East, so we haven't disproved Sharansky. But he's a famous name. In fact, Bush gave him the Medal of Freedom Award last week in the White House with several other well-known people. I don't remember who the other people were. But since your question is Begin, let's go back to Begin. So Begin was the head of this one party that was supposed to be the successor to Jabotinsky. And when the state was formed, they had two armies. They had the Haganah from the kibbutzes, that later became the official Israeli army. Then you had people in it like Dayan, Rabin, Yitzhak Rabin, all these people became prime ministers except Diane was considered too flamboyant, so he never got to be prime minister, but he was defense minister, he had the eye patch, he was foreign minister, he was lots of things. And then he and Sharon both went over to Begin as the right-wing party for a while, but they were always swinging back into the middle. This is what Olmert has done at the moment. He swung back into the middle, even though he was supposed to be a right-winger when he came in. And basically they destroyed the Jabotinsky party again by what Olmert and Sharon did with this new party called Kadima. That Sharon, Kadima means forward. In the army you say, when you're charging a position in Israel, you say Kadima, Kadima, you know, so, and he's used that as a party. But when Sharon went into occultation or stroke situation, Olmert is the leader, and everyone hates Olmert. Nobody likes Olmert in Israel. They all think he's a totally inadequate, you know, ridiculous person. And he's only the leader because of what happened to Sharon. And he was one of the ones who would follow Sharon and do his bidding for everything. People say Sharon withdrew from Gaza the way he did and destroyed all those people's houses and all the assurances that he gave. They weren't hurting anybody there. They were just on the outskirts doing farming. And now Gaza's become a center of missiles and terrorism, and they're loading in all kinds of missiles there and so on. So there'll be some real trouble coming from Gaza before long, again. People say that it's because of his sons were involved in criminal activity and he knew they were going to be prosecuted, that if he made a deal with the left wing, the prosecutors would let up on his sons. And I think that's really what, a lot of what was behind what Sharon was doing to save his sons and stuff. One of Sharon's sons was accidentally shot by his revolver when he was young, playing with another friend of his. He may have been playing with his younger brother. I don't remember exactly what happened. Very great tragedy. And Sharon's first wife was in an automobile accident on the road from Jerusalem to Tel Aviv, and some people say she purposely crashed into an oncoming car, and he ended up marrying her sister. And that's all very checkered Israel history past, but Sharon is a very strange sort of Israel product. And I told you that his father was in the Moshav movement, not the kibbutz movement. So you have the labor movement, which was really the people everyone thought was the Israeli government. Ben-Gurion came out of the labor movement, and so you had the Labor Party. And then you had this right-wing party that had many names, but ultimately after the Six-Day War, 67, Sharon came out of the army and spoke to Begin and got all the other different parties, liberal and so on, and they put it all together in this party that they called the Likud, the alliance. So you had Likud versus Labor. And then Likud came to power. And that was when Carter and Camp David and so on occurred. Now, Sharon destroyed his own party that he created, Likud, because it wasn't doing what he wanted them to do, and he was afraid that Netanyahu was going to get more power again, and he was very jealous of Netanyahu. Netanyahu had already been prime minister once, but he had some personal problems with his wife, and some weird things happened in terms of, I forget what the gossip in the press that caused his downfall, but he had some issues that caused his collapse, and then he was trying to recoup, and Sharon didn't want that to happen, and he realized that Netanyahu had more support in the Likud. So he took the people that supported him, made an alliance with the centrist left-wing Labor Party, and started a new party that presently controls Israel called Kadima. But Kadima exists only on paper. The next election, it will probably dissolve and evaporate, and you'll go back to old-style Israeli politics, which will be basically the Jabotinsky party on the right, that's why I'm telling you all this, and the labor-type people on the left. And that's how the alignment is set up in Israel to some extent. What was your question? Who had the question about what could they have done? You had the question. What was your question? Don't be afraid. get your hand over your mouth, but nothing to be afraid of. She was asking me, I remember her question better than she does. She was asking in the break, what could they have done in the 30s? Well, I told you, they could have done in the 30s exactly what they did in the 40s after the Holocaust, but the Holocaust wouldn't have happened at the time of the 30s. They could have, as a whole unit, objected to the closing of the borders. And the British were not in a very good position then to do anything to, manpower-wise, given the threat from Germany and in Japan. There's not a lot that they would have been able to do to stop them. They could have done in the 30s what they did in the 40s. I don't understand what could have stopped them. Only ideologically they weren't ready. They didn't realize what was coming, as you say. Well, should they have realized? Well, maybe it's hard. But people like Jabotinsky did seem to have a clear understanding of what was coming. And so, yes, he was not. You say, well, you see, they didn't support him. No, the British threw him out of Palestine, as they did Wingate and all other troublemakers, as they did the Mufti. But they basically froze the situation and closed the gates to immigration, and I think that sealed the fate of the Jews in Europe. Maybe they did, and I think they did it with malice, aforethought, because if you say that they didn't understand what they were doing, yeah, they didn't totally understand what was coming. But then after the war, they followed the same policy, so you can't say that they didn't understand what they were doing. If even after all that happened, they still had the gates closed and wouldn't open them, then you have to say that they understood very well what they were doing. And they were really, I think, terribly, what do you call it when someone isn't living up to their arrangements? Not guilty, but there's another word. Blameworthy maybe is the word. Not straightforward in what they were supposedly doing. Yeah.
Accountable, maybe is the word.
No, something like that. But they should have been held to account, yes, responsible for a lot of what happened. And people don't usually blame them for anything. Same in Iraq today, you see. We have Tony Blair, who's a big supporter of Bush, or vice versa. It's not clear whose idea, the original idea to go into Iraq was, Bush's or Blair's. They were both equally enthusiastic for it. But Blair is always tying it to the Palestine problem. He always wants the Palestine problem, as if the Palestine problem, the British haven't messed that up enough. They want to do more there. So things haven't changed a lot on the British part. They don't acknowledge their responsibility. They created the Iraq situation to a certain extent themselves. They went into Iraq, the same as the French went into Vietnam. The French created Vietnam and all the problems there. Ho Chi Minh and everyone fought against the French. We picked up the mantle from the French for some odd, unknown reason. The British created Iraq. It didn't exist. These were provinces in the Ottoman Empire, separate provinces. They put 3 different provinces together and made a country called Iraq. They created the country. There was no country called Iraq before the British created it. They even gave it its name. They put a king there from this royal family in Mecca. It wasn't even a royal family. It was just the Sharifs, a noble family that headed the Hajj in Mecca. How come they didn't have anything in Mecca? What happened to the Sharif family in Mecca? Do you know?
Sauds took them over.
The Sauds threw them out. Who are the Sauds? The Saud are this family from eastern part of the Arabian Peninsula. The Sharifs of Mecca had no power at all. They were just a figurehead, religious honorary position. The British gave them power. The Sauds did. They had this Wahhabi religion and tribal sheikhs, and they also had another person behind them who helped them move forward into power and was involved in the oil exploration and so on. A person called Philby. His name was St. John Philby. In English, they would call that St. John Philby. Have you ever heard of a Philby? Never heard of the spy scandal in the CIA and the British government? Kim Philby, the third man and everything? It was his son who was the man who was in the British intelligence, who was a Russian spy, and who eluded all the American exposés from the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and finally fled to Moscow and was made a brigadier general in the Russian army. Kim Philby. Anyway, that's this Philby's son. His father sponsored the Saudi royal family, so you had Philby operating on one side and Lawrence operating on the other side. I think it was that Philby was involved with the colonial office in Britain, who had an India interest, so that was the eastern side. Lawrence was involved with the Foreign Office in England, who were interested in diplomatic and foreign affairs, the Versailles Conference, and the two were supporting two different groups in the Arabian Peninsula and fomenting unrest and trouble. And ultimately the Sauds won and threw these Lawrence Sharif people out of Arabia. In 1926, a guy called Faisal, who was one of Saud's sons, defeated the whatever was left, and they never really had an army, the Hashemites in Mecca, and threw them out. They've never been back since. The Sauds took over all of Arabia under Philby and others, cajoling, inspiration, and advising, and so on. So then the Sharifs, the Hashemites, went up to Transjordan. So the Foreign Office then, with Lawrence and others, gave them Transjordan to play with. And Iraq, they gave them Iraq too. They brought this Faisal, who had been thrown out of another Faisal, this is, the Hashemite Faisal. They gave him the one that Lawrence was working with. He was thrown out of Syria by the French in 1919. They gave him Iraq. They thought, oh, well, Iraq, he'd be good there. But when the Saddam Hussein type Baathists took over Iraq, they killed the whole royal family the British put in there and just wiped them out totally. So that was the end of Faisal's part of the Hashemite family in Iraq. So what am I saying? The British created Iraq, created the mess there, but they act like it's all America doing all these things. All America's trying to do is, bring some order to the place, I think, really. I don't think, and I understand the Americans don't even rely on Iraqi oil, actually. They have their own sources, apparently, and most of Iraqi oil goes to China and Japan. Yeah, so, it's nothing to do with America, the oil in Iraq particularly. So that's the myth that America is involved in all that, but I think America really wanted to try to help out the situation, and Saddam Hussein was a brutal monster, and he had made certain commitments to the American government. That's why they released him and released his forces after the Gulf War, and he went back on all those commitments he made, and he must have killed around 200,000 or 300,000 Shiites and 100,000 Kurds or something, and that's a dishonor to the Americans for someone that they let go to behave like that. So they sought an excuse, the weapons of mass destruction, but they really, the Bush people around him really wanted to not just pay him back, but to say you can't treat your commitments to America like this. And I don't think it wasn't just a matter of weapons of mass destruction. That's why it wasn't a matter simply of they're supporting terrorists. They were supporting terrorists. They were giving all the suicide bombers in Palestine something like $20,000 every time one blew himself up. They give it to the families. That's what Saddam Hussein was doing. In any case, that's not a reason to go to war, but the point was, I think they wanted to try to perform on American commitments, for right or wrong, and they didn't do it in a very good way, but they were picking up the pieces of the British. So, back to Iraq. The situation in Iraq is you have an artificial country being held together in an artificial manner. Just like in the Balkans, just like everywhere else. And now when you take the monster away, the glue, the murderer that holds it all together and frightens everyone into submission, you see what happens. So what's the answer? To my mind, the answer is to stop trying to hold the whole thing together and let it go out into its constituent parts where it naturally was in the first place, before all the British and Americans got involved in it. But this is what they don't want to do. So Americans are going to keep on getting killed there till they decide to let the thing go the way it's supposed to go. But they can't let then one side bully the other. So they have to at least give some support to the Kurds, who are friendly and who love America and are doing very, very well and are not killing anybody. If the Shiites are not killing people and so on, give them some support and so on. And stop the Sunnis from the middle from becoming belligerent again. And that doesn't mean you have to bring American armies in. You can do that from the air. That's what they did in the old Kurdish area before. So anyway, I don't want to be the big genius about it, but the British are involved in a lot of these places, and they blame us. That's what I object to. They make it all like, oh, it's America's fault. No, it's not America's fault. And Vietnam, oh, it's America's fault. No, it's not America's fault. We're just picking up the pieces in a stupid way. Maybe it's our fault for being dumb. Okay, but we even blame ourselves. All the people in America think, oh, it's our fault. No, it isn't. We're stupid, but we didn't create these problems. Yeah.
Would you consider telling us about the philosophy of kibbutz and how it relates?
Well, it's so complicated because they're all different kibbutz movements. And it started with the socialism in Russia, you see. So they mixed socialism in Russia with Zionism. And this Bilu, come Israel, let us go, and Hibat Zion movement that you were hearing about. Probably the best selection in this book on that score is the Gordon, A.D. Gordon materials that I haven't read with you. But that would give you the philosophy of the kibbutz movements, and that Lacour book, History of Zionism, has whole sections on the labor Zionist movement. But the kibbutz is, to a certain extent, becoming old-fashioned in Israel. Only about
considered a failure, isn't it?
No, it's not a failure. They're very well established. I like little towns. But only about 15% of the population, I think, is living on kibbutzim now. And it's become a more modern, capitalist country like most countries in the world. The agriculture is... That's the thing about Sharon. You ask about Sharon, but he used his position to get himself a private estate, a private sort of plantation or farm or whatever you want to call it. I mean, that was never done in Israel by anybody like that. He has a huge, what he calls farm down in Gaza, down in the Negev, near Gaza. So yes, the kibbutz is a socialist movement, which was useful in clearing swamps and supporting each other while they were building up the land. And I think they did a wonderful job. And you go to, but I don't think it's failed. It's just there's no place for it now. A lot of them are going into modern industry. They have furniture factories on kibbutzim. They have
Tourism hotels.
Huh?
Tourism hotels.
Hotels, Silicon Valley type enterprises. So they're all getting modern, and I just think that people just don't want to live like that. People don't want to live in a state of collectivization if they don't have to, and so they lose a lot of their young people. But I can't give you the whole philosophy of the kibbutz on one foot. I'm trying to do the history as well. But any other questions that we have here on this situation? Well, let me try to sum up, and then we'll do your evaluations. First, let me talk about the exam. Or rather, maybe I'll sum up first. So what I'm basically showing is what started out way back when as reading Mendelssohn and Emancipation from the Ghettos is quite a miraculous, incredible movement of history, you have to admit, and brings us all 2 centuries later into the present situation that we're witnessing. We go through, the movie was very good in that regard in showing, how whole populations were annihilated, the things people had to go through in continental Europe and so on before nobody was left anymore in most of these countries. That's why we concentrated so much on Israel and Zionist thinking in the second part of the course, because in the first part of the course, what people were trying to do basically was throw the yearning for nationhood out of the lexicon of the people and make accommodations with the situation of emancipation, that they could be good citizens in each country that they were in, which is noble, and no one is against being a good citizen of America, a country that accepts you and wants you and treats you with a certain amount of dignity and equality. But these countries in Europe weren't doing that. And as you see, even after the World War II, I'm not sure that they still aren't doing it in most cases. They claim they have laws and things that they have now sort of Bill of Rights, human rights that they ascribe to, yes, a bit late in the day, I would say. Better late than never, perhaps, but Jews aren't really very welcome in most countries of Europe to this day. So what, everyone's supposed to come to America? Is that it? Why should America be burdened by this? So the Palestine became the issue, I think, and just the thing that the Reform and conservative Jews were wrestling over and deleting, obliterating from the practice of their religion became their cry. And so we have all of these different currents of Zionism, of the early Zionist thinkers, the Habat Zion movement type thinkers, the Pinsker sort of ideologues, the Hess type people. And then we come into the, if you like, the high point, if you want, with the Dreyfus affair, which illustrated the impossibility of being treated in an equal manner in European, continental European environments. Particularly like a forward-looking country like France. Forget about Hungary in the movie that we saw. So that propelled the Herzl people, the Brandeis people forward in their ideological thinking. And then we get the cultural Zionists that we worked on, and then we get the Jabotinsky sort of reaction to this cultural Zionism. And it brings us up to the present day. I don't have the answer for modern Israel. I don't have any idea which way modern Israel should go, but I think so many opportunities have been missed to state definitely where you stand and to stand on that period. Of course, you are dependent on other countries for arms to some extent, I guess, modern airplane equipment and so on, so you have to make a political accommodation to some extent in order to keep up with the armaments race, etc. So it is a difficult situation for anyone in the power of politics. I don't pretend it isn't, but it seems to me that you can make mistake after mistake. I'll say one last mistake and then we'll finish up. To my mind, the Carter-Sinai Accords were a terrible mistake for Israel. And because they set the pattern for everything that came afterwards. You know, Sinai was totally undeveloped. The Egyptians were not interested in Sinai, only as a place to launch attacks against Israel from. They didn't do anything with it. It was just some tribes occasionally wandered across it. There was no development there. The Israelis built wonderful settlements there in the short time that they were there. Sharon was Begin's pawn. He bulldozed the settlement of Yamit, which is the same thing he did to Gaza. Bulldozed beautiful settlements they built. They did all the tourist industry down in Sharm el-Sheikh. The Israelis, they built all that up. They had wonderful nature reserves along the Sinai coastline there. A place called Nueva, where skin divers and underwater fishermen was a paradise for people who love that sort of thing. Some of us used to say that if Begin ever wore swim trunks, which was incomprehensible, he would never have given up Sinai. I mean, the point is that you don't give the whole area of Sinai back to a country that doesn't even value it, only for pride. If you want to make an accommodation, you say, you take half, we'll take half. And instead, Begin gave it all back. That was very fine and noble, but what's been the result? Every other place now wants the same deal you made with the Egyptians. Once you start giving everything back, you've got to give everything back to Syria, you've got to give everything back to the Palestinians. You have to keep giving everything back till you disappear. No one's going to accept anything less because the Middle East is based upon pride. Face, they're not going to accept anything less than what you gave the Egyptians. It's not being stubborn. It was, besides that, and the other reason I think it was a terrible mistake, not that some benefit didn't accrue, they kept Gaza and gave up Sinai. I mean, that's insane. I mean, you'd have to be a madman to do such a thing. What you should do is give the Egyptians back Gaza and keep part of Sinai. It says that they had 2 huge modern air bases in Sinai, early warning areas. You're talking about the nuclear age. You need early warning areas for the nuclear strikes and coming missile attacks. What the requirement for the modern age is decentralization, not centralization. You can't just all retreat to Tel Aviv area and expect you're going to survive. What's going to happen? Well, they're going to nuke Tel Aviv and everyone is gone. You have to actually decentralize. Son, I gave you the open territory. It was uninhabited. Instead, they kept the West Bank, a hotbed of problems, full of people, and Gaza, and gave up the empty areas. I mean, only a lunatic would make such under political pressure from Carter, because Carter wanted to get the Nobel Peace Prize just like Clinton did, and so on. So I'm talking about these calculations. You say, what could be done? You can be sometimes a little more stubborn. You can be stubborn if you're interested in survival. And I think the Israelis have put their survival in grave jeopardy, frankly. I don't know what the answer is going to be, but we're facing a nuclear age. And I realized that in '73 when I first came out here to California, that Israel was atom bomb target #1. And I think it is. And you can't, just back up into a population concentration in a situation like that. Sooner or later, someone is going to do something in that regard. And I think it's the Persians, Iranians are saying it's going to be sooner as far as they're concerned. So anyway, that's my summation. I may be wrong. That's all I can say to you. I have no answers. I have no solution. You've got the whole modern history of the Jews to think about. The exam. We'll have some short IDs like we had on the midterm. We'll have, hopefully I can think of 2 out of 3 essays. I'm not sure I'll be able to think of 2 out of 3 essays, but obviously we will maybe work on the predecessor people, the people like Pinsker and Hess, and then maybe the political people, the people like Herzl and Nordau and Brandeis, people like that, and then the cultural people, the people like Weitzman and Ahad Ha'am. Ben Yehuda I would put in the forerunner category with people like Hess and Pinsker and Alcalay and the other one we did, I forget what the name of the person was. But you have all those people you can look at, and I'm going to try to divide. I'll have some IDs from there, and you'll do 2 out of 3 essays, and I'll try to divide up all those subjects into 3 different parts, and you'll choose 2. And for historical material, you can bring in as much historical material or as little as you want. The Peel Commission. We talked a bit about the modern political situation. We talked a little bit about people like Wingate, T.E. Lawrence, Iraq, Hashemites, things like that. If you want to bring those things into your essays, you can. You can bring little note cards. You can bring your Zionist idea book. That's it. Any questions? Well, thanks for being patient with my very one-sided presentation. I apologize to you. We have an evaluation to do. You can't run away. I'm sorry, but my friend here is going to do this and give out the pencils. What's the number here? 6179. You guys put 6179 here, and I'll get out of here in a minute. I just want to get my thing out. I'll wait till they finish. Sorry for this pain of that you have to do this kind of thing, but